Sarah Martinez knelt on the hot concrete ground next to the tall shooting range wall. The morning sun was already burning her back through her work shirt. Sweat drops rolled down her face as she stared at the 3 large bullet holes she needed to fix before lunchtime. Her knees hurt from kneeling on the hard ground for over an hour already. She had been working as a maintenance worker at Camp Pendleton Military Base for exactly 2 years and 4 months. Every day was almost the same. Wake up at 5 in the morning. Drop her 8-year-old daughter Emma at her mother's house by 6:30. Drive through the base gates by 7:15. Pick up her tools from the storage shed. Then spend the day fixing whatever was broken on the base. Most days it was simple work. Painting walls that had been scratched. Replacing broken light bulbs in the hallways. Fixing doors that would not close properly. Sometimes she had to patch bullet holes in the shooting range walls. The soldiers practiced shooting here every single day. Sometimes their aim was not perfect and bullets would hit the concrete walls instead of the targets. Sarah liked this job because it paid well and nobody bothered her much. The Marines and Navy people who worked on the base barely looked at her anymore. She was just another person in work clothes carrying tools around. That was exactly how she wanted it. After her divorce 2 years ago, she needed work that was steady and quiet. She needed to make enough money to take care of Emma without drama or complications. Her ex-husband David had left them with almost nothing. He took most of their savings, account, and moved to another state with his new girlfriend. Sarah had to sell their house and move into a small apartment near her mother. The divorce had been ugly and expensive. David fought her on everything, even though he was the one who cheated and left. But Sarah was a fighter. She had always been tough, even as a little girl. Her father taught her that when life gets hard, you work harder. You do not complain and you do not give up. You find a way to take care of your family no matter what. So when David left, Sarah did not waste time feeling sorry for herself. She found this job and started building a new life for her and Emma. The shooting range was usually her favorite place to work on the base. It was quieter than the other areas. Most of the time she could work without interruption. The sound of gunshots had scared her at first, but now she barely noticed them. They were just background noise, like traffic or air conditioners. She opened her toolbox and pulled out the concrete mixing powder. She poured some into her plastic bucket and added water from her water bottle. Then she used her small shovel to mix it until it looked like thick gray mud. This part of the job was easy. She had done it so many times she could do it with her eyes closed. The first bullet hole was about the size of a quarter. Someone had been practicing with a small handgun and missed their target. Sarah scooped some of the concrete mixture onto her putty knife and carefully filled the hole. She smoothed it out so it would be level with the rest of the wall. In a few hours it would dry hard and she could sand it smooth and paint over it. While she worked on the second hole, she thought about Emma. Her daughter was doing well in 3rd grade this year. She was smart like her mother and loved to read books about animals. Emma wanted to be a veterinarian when she grew up. Sarah was determined to save enough money to send her to college someday. She had already started putting $20 a week into a savings account just for Emma's education. The second hole was bigger and deeper. This one came from a larger gun. Sarah had to mix more concrete to fill it completely. As she worked, she heard footsteps on the concrete behind her. Someone was walking toward the shooting stations. This was normal. Soldiers came to practice, shooting all day long. Sarah did not turn around to look. She had learned that it was better to mind her own business on the base. The military people had their jobs and she had hers. As long as she did her work well and stayed out of their way, everything went smoothly. But something felt different this morning. She could not explain why. Maybe it was the way the footsteps sounded. They were careful and deliberate, like someone who was thinking hard about something. Most soldiers walked with confidence and purpose, but these footsteps seemed more cautious. Sarah finished filling the second hole and moved to the third one. This was the largest hole of the day. Someone had fired a very powerful gun and the bullet had made a hole almost as big as a golf ball. She would need to use a lot of concrete mixture to fill this one properly. As she mixed more concrete, she became aware that the person behind her had stopped walking. She could sense someone standing at one of the shooting stations, but they were not shooting yet. Usually when soldiers came to practice, they started shooting right away. This person was just standing there quietly. Sarah tried to focus on her work, but she kept feeling like someone was watching her. It made her uncomfortable. She had never felt unsafe on the base before, but today something seemed different. The air felt heavy with tension, like the feeling before a thunderstorm. She carefully filled the large hole with concrete, taking extra time to make sure it was smooth and even. Her hands were steady despite the strange feeling she had. 2 years of doing this work had made her very good at it. She took pride in doing quality work that would last. The sun was getting higher and hotter. Sarah could feel sweat running down her back and arms. She would need to drink more water soon or she would get dehydrated. The California desert heat was brutal, especially when working outside on concrete that reflected the sun's rays back up at her. As she put the finishing touches on the third patch, Sarah finally allowed herself to glance toward the shooting stations. She saw a man in Navy uniform standing perfectly still at station number 7. Even from a distance, she could tell there was something special about this soldier. He stood differently than the others. His posture was straighter and more alert. His eyes seemed to be looking everywhere at once. Sarah had seen enough military personnel over the past 2 years to recognize different types of soldiers. This man was clearly not ordinary infantry. Everything about him suggested he was someone important, someone highly trained. The way he held himself reminded her of a wild animal that was always ready to move quickly in any direction. The man was loading his weapon with unusual care and precision. His movements were smooth and practiced, but there was an urgency about them that made Sarah pause in her work. She had the distinct feeling that this was not going to be an ordinary day of target practice. Sarah finished smoothing the concrete over the third bullet hole and wiped her hands on her work pants. The mixture was perfect and would dry strong and even. She had become an expert at this job over the past 2 years. Her patches always looked professional and lasted longer than most other workers' repairs. She glanced at her watch. It was almost 10:30 in the morning. If she worked steadily, she could finish cleaning up her tools and be ready for lunch by noon. Emma was having lunch at school today, but Sarah liked to call her every day at lunchtime just to check in and hear her daughter's voice. The Navy soldier at Station 7 was still preparing his weapon. Sarah had never seen anyone take so much time getting ready to shoot. Most military people came to the range, loaded their guns quickly, fired their practice rounds, and left within 30 minutes. This man had been standing at his station for almost 20 minutes and had not fired a single shot yet. Sarah packed her concrete mixing supplies back into her toolbox. She would need to let the patches dry for at least 2 hours before she could sand them smooth. That gave her time to work on other maintenance jobs around the base. Her supervisor had given her a list of 5 different repair jobs to complete this week. As she organized her tools, she heard a phone buzzing nearby. The sound was coming from the direction of Station 7. Sarah continued packing her supplies, but she could not help listening when the Navy soldier answered his phone. His voice was low and serious. "Morrison here," the man said into his phone. Sarah had excellent hearing. Her father used to say she could hear a mouse walking across carpet from the next room. Even though Morrison was trying to speak quietly, his words carried clearly across the concrete shooting range. "Roger that. How long do we have?" Morrison asked. There was a pause while someone spoke to him through the phone. Sarah could not hear the other person's voice, but she could tell from Morrison's body language that he was receiving important information. "Understood. I'm at the range now," Morrison continued. His voice had become more tense. Sarah noticed that he had stopped preparing his weapon and was now standing completely still, focusing entirely on his phone call. Sarah tried to mind her own business, but something about the conversation made her pay closer attention. In her 2 years working on the base, she had learned to recognize different types of military communications. There were routine calls about schedules and supplies. There were training calls about practice exercises, and then there were the serious calls that meant something real was happening. This was definitely a serious call. "No, negative. Too far out. We need someone here now," Morrison said. His voice was getting more urgent with each sentence. Sarah felt her stomach start to flutter with nervousness. She did not know what Morrison was talking about. but his tone of voice reminded her of the way her father sounded when there was a real emergency. Her father had been a volunteer firefighter for 15 years, and Sarah remembered how his voice would change when he got called to a dangerous situation. Morrison was quiet for a long time, listening to whoever was speaking to him. Sarah could see his shoulders getting more tense. He kept looking around the shooting range as if he was checking for something or someone. "Copy that. Out," Morrison said, and ended the phone call. Sarah quickly looked down at her toolbox and pretended to be busy organizing her supplies. She did not want Morrison to think she had been listening to his conversation, but she could feel him standing there not moving, just thinking about whatever he had learned during that phone call. The shooting range suddenly felt very quiet. There were no other soldiers practicing today, which was unusual. Normally there would be at least 3 or 4 people shooting at different stations throughout the morning. The empty range made every small sound seem louder and more important. Sarah closed her toolbox and stood up. Her knees were stiff from kneeling on the concrete for so long. She brushed the concrete dust off her work pants and picked up her water bottle. The desert heat was making her thirsty, and she needed to stay hydrated to work safely in the sun. As she drank her water, she noticed that Morrison had turned around and was looking directly at her. This made her very uncomfortable. Military personnel usually ignored civilian workers completely. They lived in different worlds on the base. The fact that a Navy soldier was staring at her meant something unusual was happening. Morrison started, walking toward her with quick, determined steps. Sarah's heart began beating faster. She had never been in trouble at work before. She always followed the rules and stayed out of everyone's way. She could not think of any reason why a Navy soldier would want to talk to her. "Ma'am," Morrison said as he approached. His voice was calm but serious. Sarah could see that he was older than she had first thought, probably in his mid-30s. His face showed signs of sun and wind, like someone who spent a lot of time outdoors. His eyes were sharp and alert, constantly moving to scan the area around them. "Yes, sir," Sarah replied. She had learned to be polite and respectful to all military personnel on the base. Even though she was a civilian, she understood that this was their workplace and their rules. "I need to ask you something important, and I need you to listen carefully," Morrison said. He spoke slowly and clearly, making sure she understood every word. Sarah felt her mouth go dry despite the water she had just drunk. "Is everything okay, sir?" Morrison glanced around the shooting range again, then looked back at her face. "What's your name?" "Sarah Martinez, sir." "Sarah, how long have you worked on this base?" The question surprised her. It seemed like a strange thing to ask during what appeared to be some kind of emergency situation. "2 years, sir. Why do you ask?" Morrison studied her face carefully, as if he was trying to decide something important about her. "Have you ever fired a weapon before?" Sarah felt like someone had just poured ice water down her back. The question was so unexpected and strange that she could not immediately think of how to answer. Why would a Navy soldier ask a maintenance worker about shooting guns? What kind of situation required that information? What? Why would you ask me that?" Sarah stammered. Morrison's expression became even more serious. "Please just answer the question. This is very important." Sarah's mind was racing with possibilities, none of them good. She thought about Emma waiting for her phone, call at lunchtime. She thought about her quiet, predictable job that paid the bills and kept them safe. She thought about how much her life had already changed in the past 2 years, and how much she did not want it to change again. "Yes, sir, I have," she said quietly. "My ex-husband took me hunting a few times when we were married, and my father taught me to shoot when I was a teenager. But that was several years ago, sir. What is this about?" Morrison nodded slowly as if her answer confirmed something he had been hoping to hear. "Sarah, I'm Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison. In about 60 seconds, I'm going to need your help with something that could save lives." Sarah felt the world spinning around her. Save lives? She was just a maintenance worker who patched bullet holes in walls. How could she possibly help save anyone's life? And why was this happening to her on what had started as such an ordinary Tuesday morning? Sarah took a step backward and almost tripped over her toolbox. Her hands were shaking as she stared at Lieutenant Commander Morrison. Save lives? The words did not make sense to her. She was just a maintenance worker who fixed broken things around the base. How could she possibly help save anyone? I don't understand, sir, Sarah said, her voice barely louder than a whisper. Save lives. I'm just here to fix walls and patch holes. I don't know anything about military operations. Morrison looked toward the main entrance of the shooting range, then back at Sarah. His face was serious and focused, like someone making life or death decisions. There's a situation developing on the base right now. I've been ordered to respond immediately to help handle the emergency, but I can't leave this position completely empty. Sarah felt her heart pounding so hard she was sure Morrison could hear it. What kind of situation? What's happening? Security breach, Morrison said quietly. We have solid intelligence that someone unauthorized is trying to access sensitive areas of the base. Multiple suspects, possibly armed. Every available security person has been called to different positions around the base. Sarah's mouth went completely dry. She had never imagined that something like this could happen at Camp Pendleton. The base had always felt completely safe to her. She had never worried about danger while working here. Now Morrison was telling her that armed intruders might be somewhere nearby. But sir, I'm not trained for this kind of thing, Sarah said. I wouldn't know what to do. Shouldn't you call for backup or reinforcements? Morrison checked his watch and his expression became even more urgent. Sarah, all available personnel are already responding to other critical positions. The closest backup unit is 15 minutes away. I need to move to intercept the main threat, but someone needs to stay here and maintain overwatch on this sector. Overwatch? Sarah asked. What does that mean? Morrison pointed toward 3 different pathways that led to their section of the shooting range. One path came from the vehicle maintenance area, another from the ammunition storage buildings, and the third from the administrative offices. Those 3 routes all lead to sensitive areas of the base. Someone needs to watch them and report any suspicious activity. Sarah looked at the pathways Morrison had indicated. They seemed perfectly normal to her, just concrete walkways between buildings. But now that Morrison had pointed them out, she realized how isolated this section of the base really was. If someone wanted to move around without being seen, these pathways would be perfect routes. Sir, even if I agree to help, what am I supposed to do if I see something suspicious? Sarah asked. I don't have any training for this kind of situation. Morrison was already moving toward his equipment bag. Your job would be simple observation and communication. If you see anyone moving through those areas who doesn't look like regular base personnel, you radio for help immediately. He pulled a military radio from his bag and showed it to Sarah. This is set to the emergency frequency. All you have to do is press this button and speak clearly. Security teams are standing by to respond within minutes. Sarah stared at the radio in Morrison's hands. The device looked complicated with multiple buttons and switches she did not understand. What if I use it wrong? What if I can't get through to anyone? The radio is simple, Morrison explained patiently. Press the button. Say your name and location, then describe what you're seeing. The people listening know how to handle the rest. Morrison checked his primary weapon and gathered additional ammunition from his bag. Sarah watched him prepare for whatever dangerous situation he was about to face. Everything about his movements showed years of training and experience in handling emergencies. I can't do this, Sarah said, but even as the words came out of her mouth, she knew she was already starting to accept the impossible situation. Sir, I have a daughter. She's only 8 years old. If something happens to me, she'll have no one. Morrison stopped what he was doing and looked directly at Sarah. His expression softened slightly. Sarah, I understand you're scared. I would be scared too if I were in your position. But I need you to trust me when I tell you that nothing is going to happen to you if you follow my instructions exactly. How can you be sure? Sarah asked. Because your job is to stay hidden and observe from a safe distance. You're not supposed to approach anyone or try to stop anyone. If you see something suspicious, you call it in and let the trained security teams handle the response. Morrison handed her the radio. It felt heavier than she had expected, and more complicated than he had made it sound. The most important thing is that you stay calm and think clearly. Don't take any unnecessary risks. Sarah took the radio with trembling hands. How long will you be gone? Hopefully no more than 20 or 30 minutes, Morrison replied. But, Sarah, time is critical right now. Every minute we delay gives the intruders more opportunity to reach their targets. Morrison gathered his gear and prepared to leave. There's one more thing I need to give you, he said, reaching for his backup weapon. Sarah's eyes went wide when she saw Morrison pull out a second pistol from his equipment bag. Oh no, sir. I can't take that. I'm not qualified to carry a military weapon. Sarah, this is just a precaution, Morrison said calmly. I hope you never have to even think about using it. But if someone approaches your position and doesn't respond to verbal challenges, you need to have a way to protect yourself. The pistol looked much larger and more dangerous than the hunting rifle she had used with her ex-husband years ago. Sir, I don't think I can do this. This is too much responsibility for someone like me. Morrison stepped closer to Sarah and spoke in a quiet, reassuring voice. Sarah, I've been watching you work on this base for months. You're careful, you pay attention to details, and you don't panic under pressure. Those are exactly the qualities I need right now. Sarah looked at the radio in one hand and thought about the weapon Morrison wanted her to take. Everything in her life had been simple and predictable just 30 minutes ago. Now she was being asked to take responsibility for protecting part of a military base during a security emergency. What if I make a mistake? Sarah asked. What if I see something wrong and react badly? Morrison was already moving toward the exit. Trust your instincts, Sarah. If something doesn't look right to you, it probably isn't right. Better to call in a false alarm than to miss something important. As Morrison disappeared around the corner, Sarah stood alone with the radio in her hands and a military weapon lying on the concrete beside her feet. The familiar sounds of the base continued around her, but now everything sounded different and potentially dangerous. Sarah stared down at the military pistol lying on the concrete next to her feet. The black metal looked cold and dangerous in the bright morning sunlight. She had never imagined that she would be in a situation like this. Just 1 hour ago, her biggest worry was whether she had enough concrete mixture to patch all the bullet holes properly. With shaking hands, she picked up the weapon. It was much heavier than she remembered guns being. The weight of it made everything feel more real and more frightening. This was not a hunting rifle for shooting deer in the woods with her ex-husband. This was a military weapon designed for protecting people and stopping dangerous situations. Sarah checked the safety mechanism like her father had taught her many years ago. The small lever was in the safe position, which meant the gun would not fire accidentally. She remembered her father's voice telling her to always check the safety first, always point the barrel in a safe direction, and never put her finger on the trigger unless she intended to shoot something. She found a position, where Morrison had suggested, behind a concrete barrier that gave her clear views of all 3 pathways he had identified. From this spot, she could see anyone approaching from the vehicle maintenance area, the ammunition storage buildings, or the administrative offices. The concrete barrier would protect her if she needed to take cover. The radio crackled with occasional chatter that Sarah could not fully understand. She heard code numbers and location references that meant nothing to her, but she could tell from the tone of the voices that there was organized activity happening all around the base. Security teams were moving to different positions and coordinating their responses to whatever threat Morrison had described. Sarah thought about Emma sitting in her 3rd grade classroom, probably working on math problems or reading about animals. Her daughter had no idea that her mother was currently holding a military weapon and watching for dangerous intruders on a Navy base. Emma expected Sarah to call her at lunchtime just like every other day. Sarah hoped desperately that she would be able to make that phone call in 2 hours. The minutes passed slowly. Sarah kept checking her watch and scanning the 3 pathways for any signs of movement. Every shadow looked suspicious to her now. Every small sound made her heart beat faster. A bird landing on a nearby roof made her jump and almost drop the radio. 5 minutes after Morrison left, Sarah heard voices coming from somewhere behind the ammunition storage building. She could not see anyone, but the voices sounded urgent and secretive. Normal base personnel talked in normal voices during normal conversations. These voices had the tone of people who were trying not to be heard. Sarah pressed the button on the radio and spoke as clearly as she could. "This is Sarah Martinez at the shooting range position. I think I hear voices behind the ammunition storage building, but I can't see anyone." The radio crackled and a professional voice responded immediately. "Copy that, Sarah. Can you describe what you're hearing?" 2 or 3 people talking quietly, Sarah whispered into the radio. "They're trying to stay hidden behind the building. I can't make out what they're saying, but they sound like they're planning something." "Roger. Keep watching and report. Any visual contact?" Sarah felt slightly better knowing that other people were listening and ready to respond, but she also felt the heavy responsibility of being their eyes and ears in this section of the base. If she missed something important, people could get hurt. 8 minutes after Morrison left, Sarah saw movement along the eastern pathway. Someone in dark clothing was moving quickly between the buildings, trying to stay in the shadows. The person was carrying something large, maybe a bag or a backpack. "I have visual contact on the eastern pathway," Sarah reported into the radio. "One person in dark clothes carrying a large bag, moving toward the ammunition storage area. Can you identify if it's military personnel?" Sarah watched the figure carefully. The person was not wearing any kind of uniform that she could recognize. Their movements looked sneaky and deliberate, not like someone who belonged on the base. "Negative, definitely not military. This person is trying to stay hidden." "Copy, continue observing." Sarah's hands were sweating despite the dry desert heat. She wiped her palms on her work pants and readjusted her grip on both the radio and the pistol. The weight of the gun reminded her that this was not just an observation exercise. Morrison had given her the weapon for a reason. 12 minutes after Morrison left, Sarah saw a second person moving along the western pathway from the administrative offices. This person was also dressed in civilian clothes and was moving in a way that suggested they were trying to avoid being seen by security cameras or patrols. "I now have 2 separate individuals moving toward the ammunition storage area from different directions," Sarah reported. "Both in civilian clothes, both trying to stay concealed." "Understood. Are they coordinating their movements?" Sarah watched both figures carefully. They seemed to be timing their movement to stay hidden, but they also seemed to know where each other was positioned. "Yes, I think they're working together. They're moving like they have a plan." "Copy that. Backup units are en route to your area." Sarah felt a mixture of relief and increased tension. Help was coming, but that also meant the situation was serious enough to require multiple response teams. She wondered what Morrison was dealing with in his location and whether he was safe. 15 minutes after Morrison left, both suspicious figures had reached the ammunition storage building and disappeared from Sarah's view. She could no longer see them, but she knew they were very close to her position now. The building they had entered was less than 50 yards from where she was hiding behind the concrete barrier. "Both subjects have entered the ammunition storage building," Sarah reported. "I can no longer maintain visual contact." "Roger. How? Long since you lost sight of them?" "About 30 seconds. Copy. Do not approach the building. Maintain your position and continue monitoring the pathways." Sarah heard the sound of vehicles approaching in the distance. The backup teams were getting closer, but they were not here yet. For the next few minutes, she was still the only person watching this critical area of the base. 17 minutes after Morrison left, Sarah heard a loud metallic sound coming from inside the ammunition storage building. It sounded like someone was trying to force open a locked door or break into a secured container. Whatever the intruders were doing, they were not being careful about noise anymore. "I'm hearing sounds of forced entry from inside the ammunition storage building," Sarah reported. "Metallic banging sounds like someone breaking into something." "Copy. Emergency response teams are 60 seconds from your position." Sarah could now hear multiple vehicles approaching fast, but 60 seconds felt like a very long time when she knew that dangerous people were so close to her location. She kept the pistol ready and watched all 3 pathways for any signs that the intruders were trying to escape. The sound of approaching sirens filled the air as backup finally arrived to secure the area. But for those crucial 17 minutes, Sarah Martinez had been the only thing standing between potential danger and the safety of everyone on the base. Sarah heard the sound of heavy boots running across concrete as the emergency response teams reached her area of the base. Multiple vehicles had arrived with flashing lights, and she could see at least 6 security personnel in full tactical gear moving toward the ammunition storage building where the intruders had disappeared. A voice came through her radio with clear instructions. "Sarah, this is command. Security teams are now on scene. Please identify your exact location so they can find you safely." Sarah pressed the radio button and tried to keep her voice steady. "I'm behind the concrete barrier on the south side of Shooting Station 7. I have clear sight lines to all 3 pathways that Lieutenant Commander Morrison identified. Copy that. Team leader is approaching your position now." Sarah saw a security officer in full tactical gear jogging toward her location. The officer was carrying an assault rifle and wearing a helmet with communication equipment. When he got close enough to speak, he knelt down behind the concrete barrier next to Sarah. "Ma'am, I'm Sergeant Rodriguez. You've done excellent work providing intelligence on the suspects. We're going to take over from here, but I need you to stay in this protected position until we give you the all clear." Sarah felt a wave of relief wash over her. Professional security teams were now handling the situation, and she was no longer responsible for watching the pathways alone. But she also felt proud that she had successfully completed the job Morrison had asked her to do. "Sergeant, there are 2 people inside the ammunition storage building," Sarah reported. "They entered about 5 minutes ago from different directions. I heard sounds like they were trying to break into something metal." "Roger that. Did either subject appear to be armed?" Sarah thought carefully about what she had observed. "I couldn't see any visible weapons, but both subjects were carrying large bags or backpacks. They could have weapons inside." Sergeant Rodriguez spoke into his radio headset to coordinate with the other security teams. Sarah could see tactical officers surrounding the ammunition storage building and taking positions to prevent anyone from escaping. The operation looked professional and well organized. "Ma'am, you mentioned that Lieutenant Commander Morrison gave you that sidearm for protection," Sergeant Rodriguez said, glancing at the pistol in Sarah's hands. "Have you had any reason to use it or display it during this incident?" "No, sir," Sarah replied immediately. "I kept it ready like Morrison instructed, but I never had to point it at anyone or fire it. The subjects never came close enough to my position to require any defensive action." "That's exactly the right way to handle the situation," Rodriguez said approvingly. "You followed instructions perfectly." Sarah heard shouting coming from the direction of the ammunition storage building. The tactical teams were apparently making contact with the intruders inside. She could not make out the specific words, but the tone suggested that security officers were giving commands and expecting immediate compliance. "Hands up! Get down on the ground! Do not move!" The shouting continued for about 2 minutes, and then everything became quiet. Sergeant Rodriguez received information through his radio headset and nodded with satisfaction. "Both subjects are in custody," he told Sarah. "No shots fired, no injuries to personnel or suspects. They were attempting to steal ammunition and explosive materials, but they were stopped before they could access any sensitive materials." Sarah felt her whole body relaxing as the immediate danger passed. The weight of responsibility that had been pressing down on her for the past 20 minutes was finally lifting. She had successfully completed a job she never imagined she would be asked to do. "What happens now?" Sarah asked. "We'll need to get a detailed statement from you about everything you observed," Rodriguez replied. "But first, Lieutenant Commander Morrison is returning to debrief you on your performance." Sarah saw Morrison approaching from the direction of the main base. He was walking quickly but no longer looked tense and urgent like he had when he left. His expression suggested that whatever emergency he had responded to had also been resolved successfully. "Sarah," Morrison said as he reached her position, "outstanding work. Your observations and communications were critical to stopping the security breach." Sarah carefully handed the pistol back to Morrison, with the safety engaged, exactly like her father had taught her years ago. "I'm just glad I didn't have to use it, sir." "That's the goal of any security operation," Morrison replied. "The best outcome is when situations are resolved without violence. But having the capability for self-defense gave you confidence to stay in position and complete your mission." Morrison secured his backup weapon and packed it away in his equipment, Bag. Sarah, I want you to understand how important your actions were today. Those two suspects were planning to steal military explosives and ammunition. If they had succeeded, they could have used those materials to attack civilian targets off the base. Sarah thought about Emma and all the innocent people who could have been hurt if the intruders had succeeded in their plan. I'm glad I was able to help stop them, sir. You did much more than help, Morrison said seriously. Your quick thinking, accurate observations, and steady communications were the key factors that allowed us to respond effectively. You probably saved lives today. Sergeant Rodriguez stood up and prepared to begin the formal debriefing process. Ma'am, we'll need to get your complete statement about everything you saw and heard. The information will be used in the prosecution of the suspects and in improving our base security procedures. Sarah looked at her watch and realized it was almost noon. Sergeant, I promised my daughter I would call her at lunchtime. She'll be worried if I don't call on schedule. Of course, Rodriguez replied. We can start the debriefing after you talk to your daughter. Family comes first. Morrison shook Sarah's hand before leaving to file his own reports about the incident. Sarah, I want you to know that you have the instincts and character of someone who can handle pressure situations. If you ever decide you want a career change, the military or law enforcement would be lucky to have someone like you. As the security teams finished securing the area and removing the arrested suspects, Sarah walked back to where she had left her toolbox next to the shooting range wall. The 3 bullet holes she had been patching that morning were still there, partially repaired and waiting for her to finish the job. But everything else had changed. Sarah Martinez was no longer just a maintenance worker who fixed broken things around the base. She was someone who had been trusted with serious responsibility during a dangerous situation, and she had proven that she could handle whatever challenges came her way. When she called Emma at lunchtime, Sarah decided not to mention anything about the morning's excitement. Her daughter needed to hear her mother's calm, reassuring voice, not worry about dangerous situations on the base. Hi, sweetheart. How's school today? Good, Mom. We're learning about fractions and math, and I got all the problems right on my worksheet. That's wonderful, Emma. I'm proud of you for working hard. Mom, you sound different today. Are you okay? Sarah smiled as she looked at the concrete wall where her morning had started so normally. I'm fine, honey. It's just been a very interesting day at work. That evening, Sarah would tell Emma that sometimes ordinary people get asked to do extraordinary things. And when that happens, the most important thing is to stay calm, think clearly, and do your best to help other people stay safe.